Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making. We're back with part 3 of the C-47 dual build. Now this is going to follow somewhat of the same format as part 2, where we're going to concentrate on one airplane at a time, and really hopefully I'm going to try and give you some different options when it comes to painting and painting styles. So I'm going to do the Monogram kit in one particular style with a certain set of paints, and then I'll do the Trumpeter with different ones. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start off with the Monogram kit. Now I primed both kits with a combination of Mr. Surfacer 1500 black and Alclad black gloss base. So in this particular one, you can see I'm laying down the gloss base over some of the unprimed parts, and this goes on really nicely. I do like the gloss base. It's really good for checking to find, you know, any tiny little ghost seams that might be waiting for you. But overall, pretty nice. This is really good for going underneath like metallic colors, things like that. But I decided to use it in this case just to have that nice smooth, silky smooth surface. Now I'm going to be using Outlaw paints for the majority of this particular painting project, and we're going to start by undercoating everything with, you know, kind of this white mottling layer to help create some variations as we start painting the overtones. And now this is just going to go in between all the different panels, and really one of the reasons why I decided to use this particular method is because, as I mentioned in the other videos, I left as many of the raised panel lines as I could. Obviously I had to get rid of some because of sanding, things like that. And I felt that this would be a good way to help accentuate in between the panels and the raised panel lines, because I wouldn't be able to add any kind of wash to help make those panel lines pop. So I knew I needed to do a lot of that work ahead of time in the paint process. So now we're going to start laying down some neutral gray for the underside color, and this I'm spraying on really thin. I mean, this is like, I'm going to say 30% paint to 70% thinner. And the reason why I'm doing this is because it'll allow me to help build up the layers and allow that pre-shading to really show through, and it'll give me maximum control. Now, same thing for the upper surface. I'm laying this on pretty thin, again, because I want to be able to give myself the most control over how much I want that mottling layer to show through and to create that modulation. And you can see that I've used blue tack to essentially mask off the demarcation between the gray and the olive drab going on. And this helps to create a somewhat solid line, but it's still having a little bit of a feathered edge because of the nature of the blue tack, how it rolls. It's not like a perfect straight line all the way directly down to plastic. It kind of curves under itself a little bit, and it allows a little bit of a feathered edge to go on. So we're going to go ahead and keep applying our main color here, and just kind of going layer by layer until I'm happy with the level of paint showing through and the level of modulation. And then on top of that, I'm going to add a little bit more of this yellow olive color just to create even more variation in the overall paint job here. And I'm just trying to apply this as random as I can, you know, considering that humans are not very good at doing random, but just trying to pick out panels here and there just to create a little bit more modulation and a little bit more visual interest in the paintwork. And then finally, I'm going to come in with a slightly lighter version of the base color. So this is just the base color mixed with some white. And I'm going to add this into areas that would fade a little bit faster than the others, like the fabric colored control surfaces, like the ailerons. And I did have a little bit more, you know, modulation underneath the main paint to lighten that as well. So it's just a matter of like layering all the different effects to really go for what I'm looking for. Here I'm going to add a little bit more fading in this area because this area would have a little bit more foot traffic from the ground crew, you know, filling up the tanks and things like that. So now we can go ahead and remove our blue tack and reveal the nice clean line between the two colors. This was a little bit of a challenge to paint, especially around the engines, trying to get into some of those tight places there. So just be aware that if you decide to do that yourself, that it can be a little challenging, but lower your air pressure on your airbrush and you should be good to go. The nice thing about doing the in-flight version of this is that I have kind of a built-in handle to hold things while I paint. Now we're going to be using some of the kit mask masking templates here so that we can paint on our markings. So I'm just applying this with some transfer tape that helps me hold the sticker in its correct orientation. I do have to make a few minor adjustments just to make sure that I'm getting all of my edges sealed around the compound curve, but overall it's a fairly straightforward process. The transfer tape is really low tack, and so it's going to stick to the airplane, to the model, more than it's going to want to stick to the transfer tape. So now we can go ahead and start applying our colors here. So we're just going to be spraying on some white here. And now we're going to be doing the invasion stripes at the same time here. So you can see I've got sections masked off on the fuselage and the wings for that. As well as you can see, I didn't show applying it, but there's actually a vinyl stencil on the nose there for the actual nose art. And it was a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot of small parts to get aligned on there. But once I got it on there, then it was good, and I was happy with how it turns out. In the end, the identification markings going on to the tail as well. So those are both a combination of the Tamiya tape and the vinyl masking. So now we can go ahead and start with the invasion stripes. Now, historically, the invasion stripes were applied on literally the night before June 6th, before the actual invasion, and they were not applied neatly. The order was given out: get the stripes on there so they can be on there. They don't need to be perfect. However, I don't know that I could do a good job of making the invasion stripes look sloppy without it appearing to just be sloppy paintwork. So for both of the kits, I'm applying this rather neatly. I wasn't super concerned about getting all of the stripes really even and uniform to themselves, but in terms of just the demarcation between the lines, I'm using the masking, even though that historically wouldn't have been super accurate. You can definitely find pictures out there where the invasion stripes, they're literally just rolling them on with paint rollers, sometimes even just with mops to get the paint on there, just to get them on there quickly and fast, in order to meet the requirements. And so definitely just I'm painting them on in a nice manner just because it's a little bit easier. And like I mentioned, I just don't know that I could do it justice to make it look hastily applied without making it just look like poor paintwork, if that makes sense. So at this point, we can start removing all of our masking. And it's always kind of a moment for me where it's okay, did I screw it up? Did I get overspray somewhere? Is the paint gonna pull up? All those worries. And so it's always a relief when it actually goes pretty smoothly. So here I'm painting the de-icing boots on the wings, and it was easier to do this over the invasion stripes, mainly just because I was actually going to be using a different type of black from the black used on the invasion stripes. And so Kit Mask makes the masks for this, and they have it for both the Trumpeter set and the Monogram kit. So now I'm going to be applying the national insignias, and these are a little bit more complex because you have to do layers. And so I'm going to try and give you just the basic idea of how to apply these. And but if you go to the Kit Mask website, they have some good tutorial videos on how to do all their masking, so definitely recommend you head on over there. The biggest challenge is making sure that you get the placement correct pretty much the first time, because repositioning is going to be difficult, and if you do it too much, you risk ruining the mask. But once we get it on, we can go ahead and start painting. So we're going to start with white. And now one of the nice advantages of doing painted markings is, on top of getting it to conform to all your surfaces is you can, if the aircraft has been in service for a long time, you can really get some really good faded effects with your national insignias, which is hard to do with decals. Additionally, when applying decals over like invasion stripes, for example, sometimes if the decal is not opaque enough, the stripes can show through, and so you can mitigate that with painting as well. So now we add on the second layer, and so this is going to be covering all the parts that stay white. So this is going to be the star and the bars. And now we'll go through and paint the blue. Now for this, I mixed a couple of Tamiya paints. I think it was like a royal blue and a little bit of black and another color. And ultimately, it was like too blue for me in the end. And you'll see when I get to the Trumpeter kit that I actually use a different paint that I was much happier with, and that I didn't have on hand when I did this one. So I left this one as is. And I mean, it's not bad. There's always room for interpretation when it comes to actual colors for these markings and stuff. But to my eye, it ended up just being a little bit too blue, like cerulean blue, and as less like more of a dark Prussian blue type of thing. So, but I am happy with how the masks actually worked out, and really pleased with how they looked. And so at this point, we can go ahead and start covering everything and clear coating everything. This is going to protect all of our paint work up to this point, because we've done a lot of painting and we want to make sure that we protect it. And it will just kind of go a long ways towards helping go for the final finish of the aircraft as well. Like I said, normally at this point I would do a gloss coat and then do decals and a wash, but I'm not doing any decals on this, and I'm not doing a wash. So that satin coat really kind of becomes our final coat. So now we can start removing the window masking and things like that, because I'm not going to be really doing any more major spraying at this point. And really pleased with how all the window masks turned out. They fit perfectly, and they did exactly what they were supposed to. Really, really pleased with how the landing lights turned out, because I did all that sanding work on it before, and really happy with how those turned out. So here we go, all the masking removed. Really love those landing lights, how they got blended into the wing there, and yeah, very pleased. So at this point, we can move on and start doing some weathering. I didn't want to do a ton of weathering on this. Again, really trying to keep this simple and basic in terms of like not going super fancy with everything, and not really pushing the limits of what I can do with weathering. So for the exhaust here, I'm just spraying on really thin layers of black paint here. And again, this is the Outlaw Paints brand, and I'm trying to keep it concentrated inboard of the invasion stripes, because my thinking is they would have applied the invasion stripes the night before, so there really wouldn't have been a lot of exhaust accumulation on the actual invasion stripes. Here I'm going to do a little bit of post shading on some of these areas around the wing roots here, again because this is the areas where the ground crew would be more active, moving about on the wing, so there'd be a little bit more wear and tear there, and just kind of picking out a few panel lines here just to highlight them. Well, technically not highlight them, but to emphasize them with this black paint here, and just kind of going around. And the nice thing is I can do this right over the painted markings that we've done previously, and it really just helps tie them into the overall finish and weathering of the aircraft. Get a few places here where in my mind grime would accumulate. Now at this point, we're going to do a little bit of oil work. And if you've seen any of my videos before where I do oil work, this is really not going to be much different. We apply some of our mineral spirits on, start dabbing on the paint, the oil paint, and then we're going to start blending it in with a large soft brush that is loaded with thinner. And we can do this a few times. We can kind of do multiple layers to build up the level of weathering that you want. But again, I'm going to keep this fairly simple, fairly light. So really we're just doing a kind of a dark brown grime, almost like a filter at this point, and concentrating around panel lines in places like that, and around like the fuel caps and things. And that's really going to do it. We're going to do a few little oil streaks on the underside of the aircraft here where the engine would, the engine would leak oil, things like that. And, but again, nothing super crazy. And so really what I'm just kind of, I've added the little dot of oil, and then I'm streaking it back with a brush loaded with thinner to kind of help pull that oil streaking back and give us that appearance. And then now we're just going to do a little bit of speckling, I guess you would call it, with some of the brown and black colors. This is just going to help, and this is really thin oil paint, by the way. This is mostly thinner, but this is just going to help add a little bit of dirt and grime there. So now we can go ahead and move on to the Trumpeter kit. So the nice thing about the Trumpeter kit is that the outboard sections of the wings are removable, so it makes painting a little bit easier. And now for this one, I'm going to definitely push the weathering on this one a lot. And that also means that I'm going to do a lot more variation in terms of pre-shading and post-shading. And the reason why I'm doing that is because during the build process for this, I actually found a great picture that I'll show later on of this specific aircraft, Turf Sport, I forget the name of it. Anyways, as it would have appeared during Operation Market Garden, and it was really beat up. And so this was going to be a fun experiment to really kind of push the level of dirt and grime and wear that I can do on an airplane like this, as well as use different painting techniques. So here I'm doing some pre-shading with a brown color, like this earth color. And that's because I really wanted to have like a level of dirt and grime to the underside of the aircraft, but also I'm going to pick out some alternating panels in this light blue color, and that'll really kind of help create some fun contrast on the underside surface with the actual gray that I end up spraying on there. So you'll get some really earthy tones, you'll get some cool tones, and I think it'll work out pretty good overall. So again, when I say I randomly apply, it's as random as humans can be, because it turns out humans aren't very good at doing random. And but I try to pick out panels alternating between having like the black panels, the earth panels, and then the blue panels. So we're going around all over the underside of this, and the wings get the same treatment. I just not showing them because it's somewhat redundant, but the wings will also get the same treatment at the same time. So now at this point, we're going to go ahead and do our underside color. So for this, I'm using Ammo Mix Medium Gray. And this is, again, just like with the Monogram kit, this is going on pretty thin. So it'll give me control over how much of that pre-shading will show through. And I can, vary it in different places if I want more of the pre-shading showing through or less, things like that. And so we're going to go ahead and go around and get all of that. I'm not worrying about overspray on the top because I'll be able to mask off and do the upper surfaces later, and but just really trying to make sure that I get nice, good overall coverage how I want it. And it because I was doing this thin, it does take a few layers to really build up to the point where I'm happy with it, and where you can still see some of that modulation showing through. But there we go. So that's kind of the final underside picture. Now for shading the upper surfaces, because I'm going to be doing a very warm olive drab color, I wanted to alternate between this ivory sand color, and then again we're going to be using the blue again to do my modulation. And one of the things that I wanted to represent was having much more like sun fading and bleaching on the upper surfaces versus like the vertical surfaces, things like that. And so you'll see that kind of overall my approach here is to tackle that vision, as it were. So there we've got all of the sand color applied, and now we're going to move on to our light blue. So I'm just using this duck egg blue color, and we're going to go ahead, same thing like on the underside, start picking out different panels to receive the color. And again, it's using blue as an undertone for a lot of these colors creates some interesting variations with the base color, and it's not something that I've done very often, and it was one of those things that I really wanted to try out on this, and I'm really happy I did. When you see the end results, I think you'll agree that it worked out pretty good, and it's going to be subtle. I don't want it necessarily standing out like, oh, here we got blue. I really want it to be subtle but noticeable. So now we can start adding on all of our base colors. So for the base, we're doing Olive Drab Shadow by Ammo Mig. Now, I really like the color range that Ammo Mig has for their Olive Drab series. They've got like 6 colors in their Olive Drab series. And so starting with the Olive Drab Shadows, or the base it's fairly dark, but I like the warmth of this as opposed to like the cool olive drab that I put onto the Monogram kit. And this definitely lends itself more towards a worn olive drab than like a factory fresh olive drab. But you can see as I'm applying this that blue color is kind of popping through there. Really liking it. Now this is, it's hard to read, but this is the olive drab highlights color. So this, I'm going to try and concentrate more on the upper surfaces. This definitely has a lot more yellow in it than the base color, and it just helps to create a little bit of more of like a highlight on the upper surfaces. So you're going to see I'm really trying to concentrate on the very top part of the fuselage, and then obviously the flat surfaces on the wings, things like that. And I get a little bit of streaking on the side there, not too much, but yeah, really like the overall modulation that's going on here, and pretty happy with it. So here's the reference picture that I'm going off of, and one of the things you notice here is the invasion stripes. So as I understand it, after D-Day, they didn't necessarily need like the full wraparound invasion stripes. They usually kept them on the underside surfaces, but it appears to me that they went to lengths to actually remove or try and cover up the invasion stripes on the upper surfaces. So in order to try and replicate that here, I'm using Ammo Mig's heavy chipping fluid. So I'm applying this first as the base layer, and I'm applying it on pretty thick. It looks like it's going on pretty rough and pebbly, but it levels out. And then once that dries, I'm going to go ahead and apply my white color. So we're going to apply this on. I'm not necessarily being very like neat and tidy with this, and I apologize with the color contrast here. I'm still working out some things with both my camera and my computer to balance that out a little bit, but I'm just trying to get this applied on so that I get good coverage, not necessarily trying to be nice and neat. Again, because I'm going to be removing most of this paint, or at least half the paint eventually, on the upper surfaces, just to replicate that effect from the picture. And so we're going to go ahead and go through, get that all applied on there, get that nice and covered. Again, I'm allowing for some patchiness just because I know I'm going to be removing it, but now we can mask off the white stripes and we can paint on the black stripes. And again, I wasn't too concerned with getting like super consistent, accurate measurements on the stripes, just because I wasn't necessarily concerned with making them perfect, but just making them presentable and reasonable. So again, doing the wings and the fuselage there, pretty straightforward. Fortunately, that the wings were pretty easy to mask off. The fuselage was a little bit more tricky, but so now here's the fun part. We get to distress the upper surfaces. So we start out by applying water, just normal tap water, over the area that we want to chip, the areas that we applied the chipping fluid to. And we're going to let this sit for like 30 seconds, and it's going to activate that chipping fluid underneath the paint. And then we're going to use that other brush, which is a little bit stiffer, to start rubbing away the paint. And you can see it's coming off pretty easily. And I'm really not rubbing it very hard. And there's different ways you could go about doing this. There's different techniques you could use, but this is one that I haven't really shown on the channel very often. So I just wanted to make sure you guys got a good idea of what it looks like. Now you're going to have to clean off your brush occasionally because it's going to, as you're pulling that paint off, it's building up on the brush, and it'll build up in the water that you have on the surface. And so initially you're going to be like, oh, that's really dirty, that looks really bad. But once you remove that, you wipe that off, you're going to be pretty good there. But you just want to make sure that you are removing a lot of that excess paint flecks, just to it'll help for you to be able to see where you need to either remove more or back off a little bit. But so just the effect that I was trying to go for was that of like the ground crews tried to strip the paint off and kind of wasn't like fully into it, but just trying to get enough of it off that they could comply with whatever orders they received, things like that. So go ahead and do the rest of the invasion stripes like that. And I was really trying hard to make sure that, some areas were I was removing a lot from some areas and not as much from others. But here's kind of the final effect. And so at this point we can move on to the rest of our painting. So we're going to be painting the de-icing boots. Now, fun fact here, I realized after I had already taken this to the IPMS show a couple weeks ago that I didn't actually fully paint the de-icing boots on the underside of the horizontal stabilizers. And there's a shot later on in this video where you'll see that I completely missed it. And I don't know how I managed to get through everything and all the way to a show without realizing it. So just, yeah, kind of funny. Anyways, so now we're going to move on to our painting the markings. And again, we are using Kit Masks. So huge shout out to them for putting in all of the work and effort to meet not just like the canopy and the window masks, but the actual markings, because they did the markings for both options that come in the Trumpeter kit. And so, and that's a lot of work. So again, just like we showed on the Monogram kit, we are using the transfer tape to remove our masks and then help us align and apply them onto the model itself. And I'm going to try not to show as much on this one just because it's largely the same as it was on the Monogram kit, but just give you an idea that the concept of painting markings is at least one for me that was really like intimidating at first, just because it is a lot of work, and there's a lot of, you have to be really careful and precise in what you do. And once you paint it on, it's kind of permanent. But there are definitely huge advantages over decals, and especially on this kit here where you can see that there's a lot of surface detail, a lot of rivets, a lot of panel lines that, that would be a challenge on a good day to get decals, even the best of decals to settle into all of that detail. So, on this kit, it's going to allow a lot of that surface detail to really shine through and be exposed under all of the markings on this kit. So now here I'm using the color that I ended up liking much better. This is Vallejo's Signal Blue. And this has a much darker, deeper blue that I think works better as the US insignia blue. So we're going through and painting all of the national insignias, just like we did with the Monogram kit. And now we're going to go ahead and start doing some yellow for some of the markings on the tail and the fuselage here. Interesting to note that in the picture of this one, you couldn't see the actual registration number. And I don't know if that's because it got painted over at some point or just, it was faded enough. I'm not sure. But so I ended up not putting the registration number on there. But here we're painting the nose art. And this one was challenging because there was 3 colors here. It was multi-layer, lots of little text. And it took me a while, but definitely got it and was very pleased with the results. So here's all of our markings that have been painted on, and really happy with how this all turned out. Much more pleased with these markings than I was with the Monogram kit, and not because of the masks themselves, but just because I felt like I had a better handle when I did this one and I had used better colors. So now we can go ahead and gloss coat everything. And in this case, I'm using the Vallejo gloss coat as opposed to my normal Alclad Aqua Gloss. And that's just simply because I didn't have any of the Aqua Gloss for this one. And I had it on order at the hobby shop. It just hadn't come in yet. So in a pinch, the Vallejo stuff will work. It's not as durable as the Alclad, but it's largely this, you get the same result and kind of the same, material. Like it's the same type of gloss as the Alclad gloss, just like, again, it's not as robust and durable, but it'll work. And as our panel wash, we're using the Flory Dark Wash. Now I'm definitely being generous when I apply this on. like I mentioned before, I really wanted to have this be a used, beat up, worn, war weary aircraft. And so just going straight with a nice, good dark panel wash. And once it dries, it wipes away with just a little bit of water on some paper towel. You definitely want to wait until it's all dry. If there are areas that aren't completely dry yet, then you just end up smearing it everywhere, and it kind of doesn't really do you any good. So definitely wait till it's fully dry, and then you can start removing the excess with a damp cloth or a cute damp Q-tip, whatever works in some of those tighter places. And then we did the same thing on the upper surfaces as well. It's just harder to tell because the dark brown color kind of blends in with the dark green. But at this point, we can go ahead and clear coat everything over it. So we're just using this matte coat, and that's going to take our shine off and seal in all of our nice work that we've done at this point. So go ahead and give everything a nice good coat. And I thin the Vallejo varnishes with X20, the X20 thinner from Tamiya. And what's interesting is it kind of makes it so when you do like the flat coat, there's still a little bit of shine. It doesn't go dead flat, but that's okay because I like just having a little bit of shine, like almost like a satin coat, because in reality, even a flat or a matte painted aircraft still has a little bit of shine to it. So at this point, we can start removing all of our masking and reveal all of our nice openings here for the Trumpeter kit, because I still wanted to try and see if I could see a little bit inside, into the interior of the airplane, just because, we have all that cool detail in there and all those nice different things inside the fuselage. So the and once again, I'm going to sing Kit Mask's praises because their masking was flawless and worked perfectly. So I'm going to leave their information down below. Head on over to their website, check them out. They're adding new products to their website all the time, and they have a service where you can send them clear parts for a kit that maybe doesn't have pre-made masks, and they'll make masks for you. And they'll send your parts back, but that's amazing customer service. So highly recommend them. Check them out. Their information is below, kitmask.com. So at this point, we've largely done all of our painting work on both kits. And so we're going to go ahead and start weathering up the Trumpeter kit. And then the rest portion of the video is going to be dedicated to just kind of wrapping up the builds, doing all the little parts and getting everything assembled. So really pleased with the overall look and finish on this particular kit. So just like with the Trumpeter or the Monogram kit, we're going to start doing some oil paints here. Now, I'm going to be more concentrating on fading than I am with like adding dirt. So I'm using kind of a buff tan color here and trying to apply it in somewhat random fashion just to kind of have a little bit more fading and wear around the wing roots. Again, the ground crews are going to be up on this portion of the wing, servicing the engine or putting fuel in the fuel tanks, things like that. And I found this great picture. So this is an actual C-47 that's flying now that has a really crazy weathering pattern on the underside. So I'm going to weather up the exhaust, and then for some reason that particular C-47, I can't say if that's like prototypical to all C-47s, but had a lot of like dirt and staining on the aft end of the fuselage, and it looked very similar to what the exhaust staining would look like. So I'm going to use the same techniques here, even though I know it's not exhaust staining because there's no logical reason how it would get there, but it was a neat look, and it definitely tickled my fancy in terms of like, oh yeah, that's the kind of weathering that I like. So I'm going to try and replicate it here, but just note that it's not supposed to be exhaust weathering, even though I'm pretty much using the same paints and techniques that I do for the exhaust. But it was visually interesting, and I liked it. It was unique, and it's on a real airplane, so people can't tell me that it's not realistic. I just can't explain how it got there. So anyways, we're just basically using different shades of earth tones, browns, and then just a little bit of black. And I'm applying this really thin and building up those layers. So, all right. Now at this point, we're going to start wrapping up the builds and adding all the little details. And one of the details that I needed to add was on on a lot of reference pictures of Normandy C-47s, and in fact C-47s in general, they have these like canvas patches around the opening of the cargo door. And as I understand it, these were applied on areas where the crews were concerned that the static lines might get hung up on and could cause the static line to rip or tear before the paratrooper's parachute could be pulled. And so I'm replicating that with some of this lead foil here, and I'm applying it on with super glue. And I'll show a picture a little bit later on of what I'm talking about. But these are areas where, and again, as I understand it, that they were concerned that the static line, the line that, the paratroopers hook up, they walk to the door and they jump out, that actually deploys their parachute. They wouldn't want them getting hung up and cut, cut or snagged in a way that would cause the paratrooper's parachute not to open. So we're going to go ahead and get this painted up. I'm just painting this by hand, no primer or anything. I know that I'm not going to be handling this, so I'm not worried about like paint rubbing off, things like that. But we're just going to go ahead and kind of paint it with this khaki color and make sure that we get it all. You have to be a little careful here because we don't want to get paint onto the fuselage, but go around, get everything painted up. And so there's the base coat painted on, and then we're going to go ahead and give it a dry brush here, and that'll help kind of make it look used, help highlight some of the folds in the fabric, and just make it look like it's not just these massive painted things on the side of the aircraft. So now we can go ahead and add a little bit of chipping. So we're just applying this with a sponge, going pretty light on here, and this is just with some silver paint, really around the engine cowls, leading edge of the wings. Now just make sure you don't chip the de-icing boots because they were rubber and they wouldn't get chipped. You could add some like fading to the de-icing boots, but just make sure you don't ever do chipping on the de-icing boots. That would not be realistic. Another fun little thing that I noticed in reference pictures is that they would mark with chalk on the sides of the airplane a number so that the troopers would know which airplane to line up with. And so I just picked a number that I knew would be easy to paint on here, just with a little bit of white acrylic paint. We got the number hit 10 here, so our troopers would know that that was the airplane they needed to get onto. And finally, we can start adding on some of the smaller bits here. So the antennas, things like that. Now, here is the picture that I was using as reference for the static lines. And you'll notice that there is one static line that is up at the very top of the door going over the horizontal stabilizer. I found that interesting. And so I 3D printed some hooks. So I designed these and 3D printed them. And I will use those to make the static lines. So you'll remember back in the first video that I actually applied the line inside the fuselage that the paratroopers would then hook up to when they made their jump. So I designed these hooks here so that I could actually hook them on to the line inside the airplane. It's one of those details that you will not be able to see, but I like that I've added it nonetheless because it's pretty realistic. Now I'm using cardstock as the actual line here. I needed something that would be flexible enough that I could, maneuver it and glue it and position it how I wanted, but still have like rigidity so that to make it look like it's being, pushed back in the slipstream of the aircraft. And so I found that cardstock, and I tried regular, just like copy paper, and I tried some other heavier things, but I found that cardstock was just the easiest and the best way to do it. And then the last little detail I'm adding on here is a little flap here that would be the actual cover of the paratrooper's parachute pack that would get pulled off, which would then allow the parachute to open. So here is the full static line. We're going to go ahead and give it a khaki color here. Now, my static lines are going to be slightly oversized to what they would typically be, and I just found that it was easier this way to assemble it and paint it and apply it all when it was just slightly oversized, but I think the effect will be nice nonetheless. So at this point, what I'm doing is I can hook in the hook onto the cable that I applied inside the fuselage, and then I'm going to, with a little bit of super glue, basically pin it to the edge of the door, and then once that cures, I can then manipulate it back along the airflow of the aircraft into a position that I like on the fuselage, and then tack it down with a little bit of super glue, and it gives me the effect that I'm after. So here you can just get a little bit of super glue on the static line, and then we'll get that pushed up against the fuselage and kind of pin that there. But I do leave the very end free, just to kind of give the impression that it, flapping or flowing in the wind. So now we just have to repeat that process about a dozen more times, and definitely get the look that I'm going for here. So I like that. Like I said, it's hard to see, but all of the hooks are attached to the cable inside, and try to have them all in interesting ways. Some of the feedback that I got when I shared the final pictures on Instagram was, "Hey Brett, that you wouldn't have a static line going over the horizontal stabilizers, because that would mean that the paratrooper had to go over the horizontal stabilizer." Well, here's the photographic evidence. I thought it looked really interesting and unique, so you can't say it didn't happen, because obviously it did. So now we're going to go ahead and wrap up some of the stuff on the Trumpeter kit, namely doing the engines. You can see there's a way more detail than the Monogram kit had, and they look really nice. I'm quite pleased. I mean, you could have a lot of fun if you wanted to do like a maintenance diorama. You could have a lot of fun detailing these engines, because you get everything back to the firewall, the exhaust collecting ring, all of that, and you can see how the exhaust lines up. So you can have a lot of fun doing like a maintenance diorama with this thing, having that all open and exposed. But for this purposes, I didn't need that, but it is an option. The resin cowls definitely are a huge upgrade to the kit cowls in terms of the correct look and profile of the engine cowls. Here we're getting the landing gear installed, and you get to see the somewhat complex way of installing everything. Now, the kit does come with real rubber tires. Not my favorite, but credit to Trumpeter. They actually work pretty good and fit really nice on this, and definitely look the part. So getting the landing gear all installed, this little emergency hatch in the cockpit. Again, I wanted, because it's offered as a separate piece, I thought it'd be fun to have it popped open, add a little more light into the cockpit to see all those great details. Various antenna going on. This door here. Now, as I understand it, this door wasn't used very often, but I kind of figured like, hey, maybe they have it open to help ventilate the cabin. Maybe it's a little warm in there. I don't know. Again, just a way to try and get a little bit more light into the interior. Rest of the antennas going on, the pitot tubes, and the aerials on top. Now, I found, I swear it felt like every picture of a C-47 I found, they had different configurations for the antennas on top. So you'll notice that the antennas on the Monogram kit are a little bit different here, and versus what's on the Trumpeter kit. I couldn't tell you which one is more correct or less correct, because there was just so many different options that I saw in reference pictures. So, consult your reference pictures on what you think looks good and go from there. So we're going to get the radio wires attached here, just using some super glue and some accelerant to get those locked on. And so the one thing that was consistent was that there were 2 wires for the aerials, but how they actually attached to the aircraft differed. But it was pretty consistent there was going to be 2 of them there. So getting these applied onto both of the kits, pretty straightforward. I mean, I've had videos on this in the past where you do have to exercise patience, because you want to make sure that the super glue is fully cured before you start putting tension on these. But once it's on there and secure, it's really nice, because the great thing about this elastic line is that you can accidentally bump it, and it just gives. It won't snap off, it won't break. I mean, I've bumped these things so many times and never had one break yet. So I love the Easy Line stuff. It is amazing stuff. So here we can apply our prop blur effects. Say that 10 times fast. So this is a photo etch product that you use to replace the main, propeller to give it the effect that it's turning and spinning. And now we can go ahead and wrap up the base on the Monogram kit. So off screen, I stained the wood, and just using it was like a mahogany stain or something. I don't remember what it was. And then we're going to go ahead and hot glue on our patches. So we have here our 82nd Airborne patch for the All-Americans. And then we're going to go ahead and put on our 101st Airborne patch for the Screaming Eagles. So these are the airborne units that took place on June 6th. So I wanted to represent both of them because they both played obviously a huge role. And then now we can finally secure our aircraft. And that's going to wrap it up. So if you've made it this far through 3 videos, thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope that I have helped you to understand some new things about modeling, some different ways of tackling both the construction phases of these builds and the painting phases, as well as weathering, things like that. Both of these kits had tremendous challenges, and it was, they definitely tested my patience at times, but I'm really happy that I was able to get through both of these kits. And the C-47/DC-3 is one of my all-time favorite aircraft. It's just one of those airplanes that to me looks elegant regardless of what it's doing. It can sit on the ground and look great, flying in the air look great, and it was a war horse. I mean, it did so much work in all campaigns, all theaters, that it's up there with my favorites. So, and I'm happy that I was able to execute my visions the way that I wanted to, and yeah. So thank you for watching. If you like the videos and the video series, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Hit that thumbs up button on the video. And if you're not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. I try to push out content weekly. And if you want to help support the channel, head down over to the links below. I have a Patreon. You can support me on Patreon, or just, liking, sharing, and subscribing helps a lot. So thank you to all my patrons for supporting my channel and supporting my work. You guys are great. You're amazing. And we'll see you on the next video.